The Chicago Bears officially begin joint practices with the Indianapolis Colts this week, and I really want to dive into why this is so valuable and even more valuable than other training camp practices.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. If you want even more Bears analysis, you can join the Locked On Bears subtext group at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBears for all 22 analysis, charting breakdowns, and so much more. Joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBears. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. On the show, I want to get into Bears-Colts crossover training camp practices here, joint practices where the two teams get to practice against each other and what kind of value both sides are able to pull from that. And we'll hear from nose tackle Andrew Billings, who does a really good job, I think, of illustrating that point in a way that is salient and easy to understand and hits home for sure, and a little bit funny, I think, in there too. Then we will break down new Chicago Bears linebacker Mykal Walker, coming over from the Atlanta Falcons, a guy who was a starter for them last season and now got released and comes to the Bears and could be some really valuable depth at linebacker with real experience if he needs to be thrown into the mix there. And we'll wrap up with an interesting exchange with right guard Nate Davis, who missed some time with an injury and ended up making a bigger deal out of it than he needed to by not answering questions about it. It was just kind of a weird back and forth that I think ended up causing more uproar or uneasiness or causing more questions than it really needed to. I think he made it worse the way he ended up handling that situation. But let's start with joint practices because it's a thing the Bears didn't do last season. They're back to doing it this year. We've seen it in years past, but this is the first time under Eberflus and Ryan Poles where they're teaming up with the Colts, and they're going to have the Bears offense going against the Colts defense and vice versa. And it's a great opportunity for players to practice against new opponents that are actually opponents and not just, teammates that are wearing your same jersey that, you're friends with in the locker room immediately after practice. And, I think it just ups the intensity just a little bit more when it's a different person going against you that is not, your brother in arms necessarily. Still guys you respect and, you're still trying to avoid fights. Like you still have a friendly relationship with these players, but it's a little bit something a little more intense. Not quite game day intense, but something that's still closer to that level. And I think it's also a great opportunity for guys to test things out a little bit and be tested against some different skill sets. And I thought the Bears nose tackle, Andrew Billings, did a nice job of explaining this in a way that I thought was easy to understand with a pretty salient example of what he deals with at practice and how it'll be different and better and more valuable to start doing it against the Indianapolis Colts.
It's a training camp cliche at this point to say, I'm ready to hit somebody other than my teammate. How real is that effect? How much are you looking forward to that? And like you're just saying, just what exactly do you feel the benefit is?
The benefit is they don't know what you're going to do. We've gone against Jeff. I know what Cody Whitehair is going to do. He knows what I'm going to do. So it's kind of just, it keeps you thinking now. Now I'm going against a guy that I don't know nothing about him, haven't watched any film, and he hasn't watched any film on me. So, you kind of get away with your little vet techniques and things like that when you go against somebody else. But by the time the second day comes around, he's back to square one. So.
But you're definitely at that point where you're looking for, that's real, that eagerness or whatever.
Oh, yeah, it's real. Because, I'm not, you can play a little harder when it's not your own teammate. That's what I'm basically.
I think it's important to keep in mind there, like what he said. He knows what Cody Whitehair is going to do, and Cody Whitehair knows what he's going to do. And I think that's something we can kind of overlook or not think about or maybe take for granted when we think about guys practicing together, especially throughout the long weeks of training camp where there's not a lot of a break in between. It's not that they're always that exact one-on-one matchup every single time, but when you're in 11-on-11 and stuff, and you're going up against the same offensive lineman all the time, you only have so many moves, right? There's only so many things, only so many ways that the blocker can block you, and only so many ways you as the pass rusher or the run defender can try and defeat that block. You can go inside, you can go outside, you got different moves you might try and go to with your arms, but you learn after a couple of practices or so what the other guy generally likes to do, what he's generally pretty good at doing, what he's not very good at doing, and how to stop that. That's the whole point, right? Is to kind of identify his strengths and weaknesses and try and take advantage of that and win your rep every time. And so when you've been going against the same guy over and over again, you get pretty good at understanding what he's going to do, right? Doesn't mean, just because you understand doesn't mean you're going to then win every rep. So, certainly there's always a battle for that, but mentally you don't have to think then that much about, okay, what's on my plate this time? What do I have to be ready for? You kind of just know this is what I'm going to get every time, or this is the realm of possibilities, the range of outcomes that I'm going to get every time I go up against this person one-on-one. And as he said, the Colts, brand new opponent, brand new team, brand new, no preparation in that way, no tape, no nothing. You're just going in and you got to learn on the fly. And I think it's a great way to keep these guys sharp, to challenge these guys in different ways, to push them in different ways, and ultimately have them grow as a result of that. Plus, I think it brings your teammates a little bit closer together when it's really us against them. Offense and defense tries to do us against them at your own practices. They'll keep score or whatever. But at the end of the day, you're all collectively us, even the guys you're practicing against, because you're all Chicago Bears. You all have the same logo and name on team on the jersey and colors, right? But when you're going against a different team, it really is an us versus them, even across sides of the ball where the offense and defense are on the same team, literally, again, at practice. And so I just think it really does amp it up a little bit, and I think that's going to be really value for all these guys, especially all the young players on the Bears roster, right? This is a team of first, second, and third year players, at a lot of different positions, guys that may have never had situations like this. Even guys like Billings and Yannick Ngakoue, they've done it a couple times in their careers, but especially for the younger guys that haven't had that opportunity to practice against an opponent like this, I think it'll be really valuable for them. And then they can take that into the preseason game and be maybe a little bit more prepared for what their opponent's going to do in that preseason game based on what they did at practice, and maybe put guys in a better position to perform at a higher level, or at least give them a greater preparation for it to perform at their best in that game. So I think there's a lot of value for the Bears doing these joint practices, and I'm curious to hear all the different developments coming out of that one. One of the developments coming out of the Bears before joint practices was the addition of a new linebacker. Released by the Atlanta Falcons, Mykal Walker comes over as a guy who was a starter for them last season, still a very young player, still potentially a lot of untapped potential in front of him. So we'll get a better sense of what he can do and how he might fit in this Chicago Bears defense next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Nutrafol. Nutrafol says you don't have to choose between hair growth and your health, because Nutrafol provides a whole body approach for men and women that promotes healthier hair. We're talking no drugs, no compromises, just better hair. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement, clinically shown to improve your hair growth with visible thickness and visible scalp coverage. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements use physician-formulated, natural science-based ingredients. It's a drug-free, patented technology that provides consistent, reliable results without compromising your health. You can go to Nutrafol.com/men to take their health wellness quiz and identify the causes of your thinning hair, and then Nutrafol will give you a personalized plan for better hair health through whole body wellness. Take the first step for visibly thicker, healthier hair. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men and enter in our promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair at Nutrafol.com/men, spelled Nutrafol.com/men, and enter our promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's Nutrafol.com/men, promo code LOCKEDONNFL. The Chicago Bears added some linebacker depth after their first preseason game, and normally we might not jump in and do a whole podcast segment about someone who's going to come in as a backup linebacker fairly late in the training camp process, but Mykal Walker is a little bit of a different story here as a guy who brings a lot of positive traits, but first and foremost, he's young. he has starting experience and has a good shot to make this 53-man roster as a guy who could be very valuable depth with experience at a linebacker spot that's been dealing with a lot of injuries throughout training camp and the preseason that definitely significantly increases his odds of making the 53-man roster. If other guys on the roster just aren't available, that ultimately can hurt them quite a bit in actually being able to make the 53-man roster, especially when those players are particularly practice squad eligible. Walker comes over as kind of a surprise release from the Atlanta Falcons, given that he started 12 games for them last season, was a regular starter at linebacker, and a guy that, as a 4th-round pick in his 3rd season, you think still has some, better football ahead of him. It was a quick decision to give up with him. Yes, he was a 4th-round pick, so it's not like he was this major investment that you think is still going to grow into some sort of like Pro Bowl all-star stud at the linebacker position, but he's got some decent athletic tools. Certainly he can drop back into coverage with some good consistency there. Has been a playmaker when he's had the opportunity to do so, in terms of a handful of interceptions throughout his career and then a number of pass breakups last season. Not a guy who you saw like consistently get burned big. Like I don't think he's nearly the sort of like speed freak at linebacker. Didn't have like the most effective, fast 40 time. This is not Tremaine Edmonds, Roquan Smith, Nick Morrow type of speed by any means at linebacker, but he can come in and have some good instincts and react well. He's a guy who missed a few more tackles last season than you'd like, but it wasn't as though it was like the worst in the NFL. Like certainly he can be a little bit more consistent in terms of coming downhill and having proper technique. And really, when you look back at last season, his missed tackles came in bunches. And I wonder how much of that is just kind of a concentration thing where he had like 3 in one game against the Cleveland Browns, but had a number of other games with 0. Right, so like I think it's just a matter of like situation to situation and moment to moment focus, technique, and consistency in being able to properly execute on those plays. So, another guy who that can sometimes not have the right assignment and reaction in the running game, sometimes be a little late to react or sometimes overrun or misread plays. Like this is certainly not a guy who comes in as a bona fide stud who, you're really excited about playing a big role in this defense. He was cut by the Atlanta Falcons for a reason, but it does still feel like there's significant upside for him here, significant value in him as a depth player, and also a guy who played a lot of special teams for them, not last season as a starter, but certainly his first couple of seasons in Atlanta. He was a 4-phase special teams guy on the kickoff coverage team, kickoff return team, punt coverage team, and the punt return team. Like he's a guy who can contribute in a lot of different facets for your team. Doesn't just need to be a guy who's a player on defense in order to make your 53-man roster. And when you start to plug him into this Bears depth chart in particular, you can see a spot for him starting to open, right? We've seen Noah Sewell kind of compete with Jack Sanborn for that starting job next to TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds. And that's it for guys that are guaranteed at this point. I think those 4 linebackers, Edwards, Edmonds, Sanborn, and Sewell, are for sure locked in. Pretty sure that Dylan Cole, who signed as a free agent this year from the Tennessee Titans, has a pretty good chance of making this 53-man roster. He too has starting experience before, has played a lot of special teams, has been reliable in that regard, just has been injured and did not play in this preseason game and has missed some training camp practices. That's the only thing. Like he needs to get healthy to make the 53. If he goes through all of training camp in the preseason without playing much, he doesn't have much guaranteed money or anything going his way. They could easily cut him and move on. You got DeMarquise Gates, who they brought back from last season, who spent some time in the practice squad. He also missed the preseason game with injury. So we saw a lot more of the rookie undrafted free agent Micah Baskerville playing middle linebacker. And then one of the other linebackers they brought in early in training camp, Buddy Johnson from the Pittsburgh Steelers. They were kind of the second string linebackers, with Noah Sewell in that spot behind Jack Sanborn. But Mykal Walker comes in, a lot more experience than the undrafted free agent Baskerville and more experience than Buddy Johnson coming over from Pittsburgh. So the longer that DeMarquise Gates and Dylan Cole remain out, not to their own fault, but just because they're injured, the better the chances that Walker can make this 53-man roster. Like he's got more experience than DeMarquise Gates, and I think not quite as much experience as Dylan Cole, but certainly has the special teams value and some of the same types of experience as Dylan Cole, to where those guys can offer you a lot more proven consistency on that back part of your linebacking core. In case of injury, as we're already seeing multiple guys, Jack Sanborn among them, dealing with injuries at this point in the process. So I feel like Walker has a lot of potential here as just a smart addition. Why not kick the tires on a recent draft pick, a young linebacker with starting experience who can also play special teams? why not bring him into your training camp, see what he can do? If I'm sure the Bears pro scouts saw enough from him in Atlanta to justify seeing what he can do, and certainly scouting him at Fresno State a couple of years ago. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, you cut him, and he wasn't here in the first place, right? It's not like you're going to lose any kind of big money for it or anything, but it's worth always adding young players with upside, and it certainly helps that the Bears have the first position in the waiver wire claim. I think that's an underrated storyline that's gone on here, is that whenever a player is waived, the Bears always have first choice. They have first right of refusal, essentially, to claim them on waivers. That lasts for the first few weeks of the regular season as well before it resets to whatever the team's records are at that time. So anytime a player gets waived, like Walker, the Bears get the first shot to claim them, and that'll be true for any player waived after the 53-man roster deadline as well. So I think the Bears are in a great spot to keep adding young players that they're interested in with not really very many consequences. They pick up Walker, they pick up the last year of his rookie deal. So it's not like it's a rookie 4th round deal at the 119th overall pick. Not expensive. Still, guys' experience. I mean, to me, this is a no-brainer to bring in a player like this, especially at a position that you're dealing with injuries and where a lot of the depth you're relying on is not super experienced. And there's still upside with those guys too, but Walker still has some upside too. So I really like the addition here. I think there's some real value there for the Bears. That's why we wouldn't normally talk about a backup linebacker coming in training camp, but Walker, I think, rose to the level of taking a closer look at how he might fit in this Bears team. The other thing that rose to the level of attention is, normally the right guard, Nate Davis, having a press conference. Offensive linemen don't tend to say a lot. There's not a lot to take away from it, but Nate Davis ended up kind of having a strange exchange of answers about his injury situation and how that's going to affect him moving forward. So I want to go through that and why I just feel like it has kind of created more of a controversy or raised more eyebrows than it really needed to next on Locked On Bears. Right guard Nate Davis didn't play in the Bears preseason game. He missed some time with injury during training camp practices. He briefly came back for one day of practice and then left again. And throughout this whole preseason training camp, the Bears have stuck with their mantra from last year of we're not going to give you specifics on injuries unless it's really serious. That everyone is pretty much day to day or week to week unless we tell you it's going to be a longer term injury. And the Bears have not had any of those yet where they've said, yeah, this is a longer term injury and we're going to really give you the details here. I mean, the closest was Dante Pettis on the non-football injury list, but he's back and ready to go. But Nate Davis has been in and out of the lineup, mostly out of the lineup, is returning to practice now and ramping back up sort of. But even then, we couldn't really get straight answers on that from him either. So I want to play for you here an exchange during his press conference where he kind of chose not to answer the questions, and that's certainly within his right. But I think the fact that he chose not to answer these questions makes us more suspicious and raises more questions for us than I think we would have had if we had just gotten a regular answer.
I think we saw you come back one day and then you were out the next. Did you have a setback? Did you come back too soon? What happened there?
Nothing really want to talk about respectfully. What really matters is that I'm back now, and I just want to move forward that way.
When you said it's been tough on you, has it been sort of an obstacle or a hindrance to acclimating and getting into the system?
No, I wouldn't say that. But like I said, I'm just gonna, hold off on those and just say respectfully. I just want to move forward. I'm back now. That's all that really matters.
How important will it be for you to get some game action before preseason ends? Or do you think do you need it?
I'm going to leave that up to the coaches and the training staff. It's not my call. So that's the question.
Certainly, Nate Davis has every right to answer the questions that way. He has every right to privacy. I perfectly understand him, not wanting to have to reveal certain details about whatever injury-related things he's going through. And maybe there were some more additional things that he was going through that he just doesn't want to get into that aren't as simple as just injury and injury recovery. And again, I understand those things. It just feels like, and I also like the way too that he says respectfully, he knows he's not trying to be a jerk about it, right? He's not trying to be obtuse. He's just choosing to exercise some level of privacy and free speech. And, he's well within his right to do so. But it just makes you suspicious. It makes you feel like something's up, right? When you don't get an answer, you start to ask, okay, well, how big of a deal is it? Why is this such a big deal? Why can't you just tell us? What are you trying to hide or keep private? Is there something that you why do you need to keep it hidden in private? Other players have injuries and say, oh yeah, my ankle was a little hurt, but then, I had a slight setback or whatever, and it's good to go. There's not a competitive advantage there. I mean, and this, he's really worried that, like, I don't know, like opposing defensive linemen are going to learn what injury he had and then try and target that injury. But it's like, if you're healthy enough to practice and play, then should you be that concerned about a re-injury situation? It just felt to me like there was a middle ground here, right? Between, I'm not going to say anything about it respectfully and tell you everything. Like, I think there's a way to be like, yeah, I was dealing with blank and I don't want to get into a lot of the details, but looking forward to getting back out there and ramping up right now. Like, I think there's a way to sort of like give enough information there to where you're not scratching your head questioning why you're being so mysterious about it, but also still maintaining a good level of like privacy and not wanting to answer some of those questions. Like, I think it doesn't have to be all or nothing in terms of how you answer that situation. And it also strikes me too, like, he sort of combined that with some follow-up questions that weren't included in the clip there, but you heard the beginning of it at the end where he said, as far as coming back, he's like, well, that's up to the coaches and the trainers. And then they asked him again, like, are you a guy that ideally do you want to get some hits in just to get ready for the season? He goes, well, that's up to the coaches and the trainers. It's not really up to me. I'll do whatever they tell me to do. And it's like, he dodged the answer of like, well, do you think you're going to be able to practice this week? Well, that's not up to me. It's up to the coaches and the trainers. Do you want to practice this week? Well, that's not up to me. Like, it felt like Marshawn Lynch in the I'm just here so I don't get fined kind of thing, where it's just like, again, it doesn't have to be all or nothing here, right? You don't have to give everything. You can just say, yeah, I love being out there with my team and looking forward to it as soon as I can, and hopefully that's soon. But I don't know when that'll be. You can be, I mean, it can be true that he doesn't know, and it is up to the coaches. That is true, but you can give more without it being such a weird, like, I don't know, it just feels like dodgy for no reason. You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand. And that's kind of the thing. It's like when you choose to, within your right, withhold all sorts of information, it leaves us then without that information and to try and guess that information for ourselves or wonder what that information might be. And when you leave the wondering and the guessing up to us without any information, we start looking at a wide variety of possibilities of good and bad. Either that everything's fine and he just wanted weird privacy, or everything is not fine and there's something very serious that's being hidden here. And by not giving us the information, you leave that open for the speculation and the questioning and the wondering, and ultimately I think cause more of a stir than it would have been if you just said, yeah, I was dealing with an ankle or whatever it was. You know what I mean? You can give a little bit of information. You don't need to give everything, but just give a little bit, kind of answer the big question. You don't need all the pressing details or whatever, but just kind of give the surface level stuff. Then I think there's no question there. But instead, we're kind of left fending for ourselves and trying to figure out, why did he answer like that? And is there more going on, or is this just a quirkiness for a player that just doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't feel comfortable in speaking and answering the media, just kind of comes up with a way he's going to respond to questions? We don't have the answer, and that's what ultimately leaves us grasping for, looking around for more, trying to find some sort of answers there. I'm not trying to start some kind of like anti-Nate Davis conspiracy by any means. I mean, by all means, it seems like everything will be fine. He'll play and it won't be a big deal. It just, I think, is an interesting exchange that I think is worth calling some attention to. Not trying to stir the pot, not trying to cause some controversy or make Nate Davis an enemy by any means. Seems like a good dude. Totally respect his right to privacy. Just feel like from a public relations standpoint, there's a slightly better way to handle that. And I just something felt weird or off about it. And whenever anything feels weird or off about the Chicago Bears team, I always like to bring it up to your attention here on the Locked On Bears podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button for the podcast, whether you watch on YouTube or listen wherever you get your podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Really appreciate you making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We love our everydayers that are tuning in 5 days a week. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you want even more Chicago Bears analysis, you got to join the Locked On Bears subtext group. It's an SMS text messaging service that gives you direct access to me. You can text me directly and it comes right to my phone and I can respond to you in real time and have a conversation. But it also gets you access then to all 22 film of every Bears game from last season, plus this season as they come out, and then individual all 22 film breakdowns where I narrate and annotate and draw over the plays to break down. We've broken down Khalil Herbert. We've broken down Yannick Ngakoue. We just broke down Travis Gibson against the Indianapolis Colts. It's all for just $4.99 a month. You go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBears. Join subtext. facebook.com/LockedOnBears. If you want to join the rest of the subtext group that's already checking it out and enjoying it. It's been a lot of fun so far. Looking forward to more goodies coming out there. Of course, the podcast will keep coming to you 5 days a week for free, just like normal. And always, you're going to have another opportunity to bear down.